Hello everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Going Past the Wire, Leveraging Social Engineering in Physical Security Assessments. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Stephanie Carruthers, Social Engineering Professional. If during the webcast you have any questions for Stephanie, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Stephanie.
Thank you for the intro, Carol. And I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen into what I have to say. And also a big thanks to SANS for facilitating and hosting me on another webcast. I am happy to be back again. The title of this presentation is Going Past the Wire, Leveraging Social Engineering in Physical Security Assessments. And I have to apologize ahead of time. There is a little lag on the slides, so again, I'm sorry about that. All right, who am I? My name is Stephanie, or you can call me Snow. I will answer to either. Not much has changed about me, my bio in the last year. Something cool that I have had an opportunity to do is join the DEF CON review board. So whenever a talk comes about social engineering, I am able to kind of lend some feedback on that. My company, Snow Offensive, we've recently done just a little bit of rebranding with the name, but we specialize in offensive security services, so phishing, vishing, things of that nature, and a lot of physical security assessments as well. All right, the reason why I developed this talk, it really stemmed from me ranting one night. I was looking over some different companies of how they perform their physical security assessments, and I noticed a couple common themes, and that was really companies, their goals were to get on site through tailgating and plug some kind of device into the network. And that was it. That's not really testing the employees or the business's physical security controls. So if they do something like that, you're left with a pen test report. You're not testing the actual physical security elements of the building. So if you are a blue team and you're listening in, hopefully you can kind of get some ideas from some attack vectors that I do when I perform this, and kind of go out there and see if those areas are secure. And then if you are a red team and you're listening in, hopefully you can also get some ideas that maybe you can add to your physical security assessments or see some different methods that I do. And I do have to apologize, the icons were all nice and pretty. We kind of had some technical issues this morning, so if you do want a copy of my slide deck, I would be more than happy to email it to you. I have my contact information will be on the last slide, so that is something I can provide. But for the agenda for today, so I'm going to be going over OSINT, which is Open Source Intelligence. You might hear it as OSINT, OSINT, OSI, tomato, tomato, handful of names, but Open Source Intelligence is going out and finding information online or even in newspapers, radio, but it's publicly available information. So where I typically look is Google, social media, forums, and things like that, and I'll talk about what I look for when I perform OSINT. Pretext development. This is where I'm going to be discussing how to choose your pretext, what you need to keep in mind, and things of that nature. And then recon, I'm going to be going over 3 different areas where I look before I actually start my attack phase. And then for the actual attacks themselves, I'm going to be talking about different attack vectors that I do, so not just going in, tailgating in, and plugging something in and leaving, a handful of things that I really do when I'm on site doing this test. And then I'm going to wrap it all up with training, and I'm going to give 2 different options that I believe could really be beneficial for physical security assessment training. Alright, so when I talk about OSINT, I typically look for three places when I'm doing my physical security assessments. The first place I look is for employees. I try to see what their trappings are. And when I say trappings, I mean how they're dressed. If they all do wear badges, do they use the same lanyard around their neck, or do some people clip it at the waist? Or maybe some people wear different types of lanyards. These are all things you want to know, because if you go on site and you want to impersonate an employee, you really want to make sure that you blend in and there's nothing you do that stands out. I also like to see different job titles. I might have someone high in the company that I would like to target, or out of office, which I'll talk about later, but this could be a great way in knowing that someone's out of the office. And then for the company location, I'm actually looking at the physical location of the company that I'm going to be visiting. I try to look for what kind of access control systems. If they have guards, that's something important to know. Cameras. Nearby restaurants I'm going to get into a little bit more and why we look for those. Maps and floor plans. So if I show up on site, I know exactly where things are. I'm not going to look lost or confused. And then event calendars as well. And then I also look for vendors. So if I'm not impersonating an employee, I'm most likely impersonating a vendor. So again, finding out who those connections are, trying to find contact names. If they do have badges or uniforms, these are things I'm going to want to know too, so I can replicate them while I'm on site. When I'm looking for employees online, the first step is that I go to is Facebook. And I like to type in the phrase people who work at and then my target company. And it usually gives a ton of different employees to choose from. I really like to target interns, as most of the time they're not receiving security awareness training. They don't know that if they put a picture of their badge online that someone could possibly replicate it to gain access. They don't have that mindset because, again, they're not getting that training. So these are some of the pictures that I did receive from Facebook. So the first two were from the employee on the previous page. As I mentioned, trappings are huge, making sure you're blending in. So they're all, dressed pretty business casual. I probably wouldn't go in jeans and sneakers because that right there is going to throw someone. And it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but employees are wearing different lanyards, and some have the badges clipped to their hip. When I see that, I know I can get away with more, and there's nothing really standard. She also put up on the second picture floor plan. This is a picture looking into the building from the entrance. So I love seeing visuals like this because I know if I were to show up on site and walk through those doors, this is what I'm looking at. So if there is a receptionist on the right, I'm not going to walk in and kind of look confused and try to get my bearings for a second. I'm going to know I'm most likely going to head up those stairs and just act like I know what I'm doing, just to get out of the way of, people, the receptionist, if there are any guards, things like that. The next two pictures I actually found because she had tagged different employees in her Facebook photos. So once you kind of go through and find the employee and look through their photos, also look to see who they're tagging. So these next two pictures were from someone that she had tagged. In the third picture, it's kind of hard to see unless you blow it up, but she actually has a HID clamshell badge on. This is very important to know because I know if I were to go on site, I would bring the appropriate reader. I have a long-range HID reader. If that's something I don't know, my gear is typically a lot larger as I'm not sure exactly what I'm cloning. And again, she posted a picture on the far right. And if you zoom in, you get a full image of what that badge actually looks like. So this is something you could replicate. A lot of companies hide behind different policies and tailgating policies, or anti-tailgating policies rather. So on the left here you'll see something from Google. Check the badge behind you. They're really banking on the fact that employees aren't making their badges public. But when you do, like this picture on the right, that anti-tailgating policy really has no use anymore. So these are really things that companies should keep in mind. This picture is more of a placeholder. I had a physical for a company in downtown LA, and my pretext is I was going to impersonate an internal employee. They had so many. I found a lot of images online. I knew how they were dressed. I knew that what their badges looked like. I found a handful of employees post their badges on social media. So I recreated it before I actually got on site. And when I got on site, I noticed everyone's badge was turned around, just like in this picture, so all you see was white. So I thought that was really weird, but I just turned mine around too, and I blended in. And later I asked my client why they had all done that, but in other pictures from previous months, they had all had their badge facing the right way so you could see the image. He explained that he knew that I was going to be coming on site, and he didn't want me to replicate the badge. Replicating a white plain badge is so much easier than replicating a badge that has images and pictures and different fonts. So it's kind of funny. They thought they were being secure, but really they made it easier on me. Floor plans, just like the visual of the girl who took a picture looking into her lobby. These are huge. If I'm able to find the layout, again, if I go on site, I know exactly when I get off the elevator, if I go left, if there's a bathroom right there where I can kind of duck out and catch my breath for a minute, that helps me out so much. You're just walking around. You know what to expect. You're not going to look lost and look like you don't know what you're doing, which puts a target on your head. So some of the places I like to look are loopnet.com. If the building's big enough in a shared building, if they're renting it or selling it, a lot of times I can find them on here, and they all have floor plans. If it's a large company and something like a really big building or tower, they'll have the name of the real estate company or the property management, sometimes hidden somewhere on their website. If you can find that, you could sometimes get floor plans from there as well. So here's an example of a building in downtown LA, and again you could see the floor plan. Also, you really want to make sure that you read the description in these floor plans or different sites, or if they are renting out similar offices. For an example here, I can see that they have security cameras and they have card entry systems, excuse me. And also they list out other tenants in the building, which is really, really cool as well, because if I wanted to go on site, I could pretend that I was maybe interviewing with one of these places and I got lost. Or if I wanted the receptionist to print out my resume, I could pretend I'm going to one of these places. A lot of times companies will have different event calendars, and it will be for either internal parties or, for this picture for example, different kinds of classes they have. And I really like these a lot because, one, you can see if it is an internal party, you can know when they're going to be busy, so hopefully the office will be a little bit more on the empty side. Or two, you can see when they have classes. One of my clients was a hospital, and they completely shut down all of the floors at night except for the first floor after visiting hours. And I really wanted to get to something on the third floor. So I went online. I found that they were having a class in their one of their conference rooms, which I knew was located on the third floor, and I actually signed up for one of their diabetes awareness classes. And I paid the $25. I checked in, and then once I got onto the floor, I just was free to roam around, and I had access to a lot of stuff. So these are really things that you want to look for on the company's website. So if you type in your target company's address on Google, there's a button underneath called Nearby. And once you click that, you can click on restaurants. This is something I do every time before I go on site. I get a list of all the nearby places I believe employees would eat lunch, so that are somewhat close and maybe not really expensive. And then also I try to find coffee shops. I do this for a couple of reasons. When I do my recon, I actually go to these places and I'm looking for two things. The first thing is I'm trying to look for employees that wear their badges out so I can document this, take pictures. Sometimes when I am doing my OSINT, if I can't find an actual picture of an employee wearing their badge, which happens sometimes, I will actually go to these places to take pictures. I'll go back to my hotel room, create the new card, and I bring my badge printer with me as well. So I'm able to do it that, or replicate that way. The second reason why I like to go these places is I like to overhear small talk. Sometimes just a littlest bit of detail can really get your foot in the door. So for an example, I was listening to two people talk at my target company who were at a lunch restaurant. And they were talking about how the CFO was at a specific conference. So what do? I go back to the client location and I explained to the receptionist, hey, I know that Bob's at such and such conference right now. He's expecting me to leave these documents on his desk while he's gone. It'll just take 2 seconds. That builds a huge amount of trust. She knows that I know he's at a specific conference. So she thinks I know what I'm talking about. So I had a really cool video. It was about a minute long. If you're interested in watching it, please email me. Again, my contact information will be at the end. It's the title was, I believe, The Day in the Life of an Intern of a Microsoft Employee in Poland. It was so much information in such a short amount of time. YouTube is one of my favorite places to look for information. If the company does have their site, sometimes they'll have recruitment videos, intern videos, just even Ice Bucket Challenge and Harlem Shake videos, things like that, where they're not really seeing how much information you could get out of it, so trappings, badges, things like that. So this next couple images that I'm going to show you, I pulled stills out of this video. So it opens with a close-up of a badge and a lanyard. You see the employee badging into the very front door. And this is important because if this is constantly locked, I know that if I'm showing up on site and try to open that door, I'm going to look like an idiot because I don't have a badge, right? The more you can do to blend in or not stand out is really important. Front view. So, you know, the second she walks in or someone walks into the lobby, reception is on your left. So again, if my pretext I'm using doesn't call to talk to them, I'm going to go to my right. I'm going to try to avoid them as much as possible, but again, acting like I know where I'm going. Another thing you see here is that cameras are in place. I thought this picture was pretty interesting because of a couple reasons. He has his badge placed at his hip, so knowing that some people use lanyards and some use their, place on their hip, that's good to know. But something else is his color on the background of his badge is different. So this is why it's really important if you are doing badge duplication, you go out and you find as many different badges as you can. Hospitals, for example, sometimes nurses and doctors have different badges. Sometimes they have stacked multiple badges. Really finding every little detail you can on a badge and comparing it to as many as possible so that way you kind of get the general idea. This was kind of fun. You just know that there's a KVM in place rather than a crash cart, so it's a little bit easier access. And then an image of someone's calendar. The thing that I just kind of thought was funny is they're a Microsoft shop, but you see Google Chrome up. So that kind of wraps up videos, but again, it's important to go out there and see if your company has their own YouTube channel, or even if sometimes employees will make their own videos. I've seen that in the past on their own personal thing, and a day in the life of a whatever employee, and they'll have a lot of information you can use out there. Now getting into vendors, this is really my only slide on vendors because I like to kind of have a starting place. Once I figure out what kind of vendor I want to use, I find the name of the vendor, And then I kind of circle back around to the employee face. So I try to find people that work at that vendor company so I can see things like their uniform or if they have a badge or especially business cards. All right, pretext crafting. So with a pretext, it's your background story. It's creating a character. It's who you're pretending to be. So I'd like to start this section off with, I am not a lawyer. If you do physical security assessments and you have a question about a pretext, I strongly suggest you talk to your lawyer about who you're pretending to be and things like that. And it is illegal, so do not do this. Impersonate law enforcement, doctors, or even lawyers. Some states have different laws on who you are allowed to impersonate and who it's legal to impersonate, so I'd really check that out as well. And then scope limitations. Sometimes I have clients who say, I only want you to pretend to be an internal employee, things like that. So it's really limiting what you can do. Pretext reuse, which I have a story about next, is if you're visiting multiple sites, it's a pain. If you can get away from it, please do. And then appearance. It can really make or break a pretext. For example, if I'm pretending I'm a VP of a company, I'm not going to wear jeans and sneakers and show up in a beat-down car. I'm going to be dressed up and probably have some kind of a nice car service drop me off. Badges, business cards, and clipboards go a long way with a pretext. I've shown up on site and asked for things, and people just kind of glance at the badge I'm wearing, and they'll give it to me. They won't question it. They assume because you look like you're this person, you have the right credentials, that you know what you're doing. So now I'm going to get into my pretext reuse story. This is actually something that Jason asked me to talk about. So in December, I had a 16-site physical security assessment in the Midwest. This client was a little particular. He only wanted me to use one pretext that he had actually picked out. So right there, warning flags everywhere. But for the first 5 sites, it worked great. I was able to get in, complete my goals, nobody questioned me. But on the 5th site, the site manager that I talked to was kind of suspicious. She can tell something was shady, but she still gave me everything I asked for. But what she did is she knew that the next site closest, site 6, and she knew the manager there. She called ahead that manager and said, hey, this person's coming and they're asking for XYZ. It's kind of shady. I haven't really checked into it, but she's probably stopping at your location next if she hasn't already. And I would maybe call someone and verify. So Site 6 apparently got that call after talking to her just 3 minutes before I even showed up on site. So I go up to the reception, explain why I'm there. And the poor thing looks terrified and I have no clue what's going on. So the site manager comes out and she starts talking to me, asking, questioning me, and her voice was shaking. Like I can tell she was really nervous, which made me really nervous. But as being as confident as I could, I, gave her all the information while I was there and she said, okay, I just need to go verify you. Please have a seat in our lobby. So I said, okay, so I'm sitting there waiting, tweeting, being bored, and I kind of realized like this is taking a while and my cover's probably blown. I should probably just leave so I can go to the next site, hopefully so my cover's not blown there. The second I stand up, I see the site manager, she must have gone out through a side door, and 2 police officers walking in the front entrance. So that's kind of the story of how I got the cops called on me, but pretext reuse is a big no-no, especially if you have tons of sites. If you have 2, 3 sites, you could get away with it. But the more you do it, the more likely you're going to get caught. And this is kind of going into the slides image, getting out of jail. There is no such thing as a get out of jail free card. People like to hide behind it and talk it up and say that it's going to save them from jail. But if someone's going to call the cops on you, they're going to call the cops on you. There's not much that's going to stop that. So with pretext, it's also important to be flexible. I was able to go to Amsterdam for a client, I want to say about 6 months ago, and my client had explained to me this was their brand new European headquarters. The security is really tight. I was going to have no luck. I wasn't even going to be able to get onto their floor. So I was really super cocky. I was like, yeah, that's not a problem, right? And so I show up to do my recon, and before that, my pretext was going to be I was going to try to blend into being an employee. I got an image of their badge online, so I already had that replicated, but I was going to bring my badge reader during recon to try to pick that up. But also during OSINT, I wasn't able to see the interior of their building, so I had no clue what security controls they had in place. So I show up to do my recon. I walk in the lobby and the receptionist is like right in front of me. Again, didn't have a floor plan. It totally threw me. But I walk around and I kind of am looking at their security. They had individual turnstiles that you had to badge in. They had right behind that was an elevator that you had to badge in. Once you got on the elevator, you had to badge in. They had security walking each of the floors and a handful of things. So I'm doing my recon. I can't pick up any badges, which is super frustrating. I go back to my hotel room and I have to think of another way. There's no employee side doors. I could tailgate in. Everything I can think of had been shot down. So really being flexible with your pretext is huge. So what I ended up doing is I changed my pretext completely. So I pretended that I was with investor relations from the corporate headquarters in America. I had called ahead and explained to the front desk staff that they were sending someone to have a tour of the facility as they had meetings with potential investors all that next week. So they bent over backwards to get me everything I wanted. The second I walked into the building, she was there waiting for me with coffee. She introduced me to the facilities manager who gave me a tour of every inch of their location. And as we're going through, I kind of explain things like, these potential investors, they're really concerned about physical security. They want to make sure that this isn't a site that's going to get broken into. And so I pretty much have him telling me all the weak points and where they're planning on fixing eventually. So if I was an attacker, I would know exactly how to break into that building at a later time. So again, being flexible with your pretexts, it's something that you should really keep in mind. All right, reconnaissance. So reconnaissance, I typically break out into 3 different domains, which is the perimeter, which is outside the building, the interior, inside of the building, and then nearby locations. So when I do the perimeter, I'm sitting in my car parked at different entrances. I try to see which entrances employees use, which entrances the public uses. A lot of time on the front door they'll have operating hours posted, so I know if it closes at 6, I want to be in there right before the doors close. See if there's anything else I could catch, like access control systems. Loading docks are really big. A lot of times people leave those open, or if there is something being, delivered, they'll have the door propped open. Dumpsters. And then for the interior, sometimes this is a little tricky if it is a small building with only a couple employees, or maybe it doesn't have public access. It's only for employees. This is harder. Sometimes I'll have to skip this during recon because that may blow my cover if they see me multiple times and I'm just walking around trying to see things. But again, if I can do this, I'm looking for what physical security controls they have in place. Do they have guards? Do they have cameras? And again, nearby, so coffee shops, restaurants, I try to go to, if there's a local Starbucks, I'll go and I'll hang out for about 30 minutes before employees typically start their day. So that kind of wraps up OSINT, pretext, and recon. So now I'm going to get into the different attack vectors. And I try to break them out in 3 ways. Low, medium, and high. So if I have an attack vector I'm trying to do that's low, this is something I can usually talk my way out of. It might be a little confusing for someone, but again, I'm not worried if I get caught doing this. I can keep going. Medium is a little more risky. It could really go either way, depends on the person catching you. And then high, if they catch you, your cover is blown and you are done. So now I'm going to be going into the different attack vectors that I do while I'm on site. A lot of people do not know there is a difference between tailgating and piggybacking, yet they use the term interchangeably. Tailgating is when you're actually following people or a person into a door without them knowing. Piggybacking is you're still following them in, but they know that you're following them in. When I was doing an on-site recently, this last February, I followed someone in and she knew about it, so I piggybacked her.
Stephanie, are you speaking? I can't hear you.
Oh, yes, I am. Can you hear me now? Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Hey, I'm doing a test. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Other people could hear you just fine. It was
Oh,
just me,
okay.
I guess. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, that's not a problem. So I was able to piggyback this employee in, but she looked at me and she looked suspicious, but she didn't say anything. So I think that's one of the issues we have with physical security. Even if people notice and they get suspicious and you can see it in their eyes that they're suspicious, they don't want to say anything. It's in human nature to want to be nice and helpful, even if you are confused. So I was able to tailgate in, do a handful of my goals. When I came back for my second visit, I was at the receptionist desk asking her to plug in my USB, but I can see out of the corner of my eye, I could kind of see into a glass conference area. And this employee was sitting there, her back was to me, and she was talking to a security guard. She was giving them my full description of what I looked like, what I was wearing, so I kind of was trying to hide behind the receptionist desk a little bit. But it had taken her 4 hours to report me. I mean, if I was an actual attacker, that's a long time before someone could actually, a long time before she reported me. There's a lot of stuff I could have done in that time. Alright, document management is another attack vector I do. It is honestly a pretty way to say dumpster diving, but really doing more than just dumpster diving. So these are looking through trash cans, shred bins, break rooms, mail rooms. I'm really looking for anything that I can see sensitive paperwork. I'm going to talk about theft soon. That's one of my attack vectors. A lot of times document management is when theft isn't in play, when it's not in scope. So if I do see documents, I will try to take a picture of them just to prove what I saw. So looking for things like PII, PHI, customer data, just credit card data, anything like that on paper. So shred bin on wheels, these are some of my favorite things. I was recently doing an on-site with JC, and even though they're locked, we were in after hours, I was able to wheel this into an office, leave him with these to shut the door, pick the lock, and go through all the things while I continued on my other attack vectors. But again, on wheels, just super convenient and fun. Elicitation. So it's really big. It's really sad that I see a lot of companies that do physical security assessments. They don't want to talk to employees. I don't know if it's just something they're not comfortable with, but I really believe if you are doing a physical security assessment, you should test employees along with the actual building itself. So I typically break elicitation into two categories. The first one is I ask them to perform a task. So pretty much, will you plug in my USB and open a file? But I'll say things like, will you please print me off directions? I have it saved here on my USB. Or I'll ask people to let me in to areas pretty much that are badge protected that I shouldn't be able to get into. And I also ask for information. I'll ask for things like where do VIPs check in, if cameras are being monitored. Again, as long as it goes with the pretext and makes sense, I'm not going to do anything to blow my cover. One of my absolute favorite pretexts that I do when I am on site at hospitals is that I am a HIPAA auditor. I have a whole form that I print out and bring with me, and I actually will act like I'm interviewing someone in authority there. My questions range from how do you protect your passwords to different physical security controls. I pretty much ask questions that if I wanted to break into the building later that night, I would know exactly their weak points. One of my favorite stories when using this pretext was when I was asking about passwords. The lady I was interviewing had explained how they recently had a company-wide password reset and how the first four digits they can choose. The second four digits were the last four of their employee number. On her badge was her whole employee number, which I took a picture of. But she went on to say that the first four was her daughter's name, so it was really easy for her to remember. I went back later, found her on Facebook, found her daughter's name, and that went into the report. So really having a well-crafted pretext and able to get a lot of information can take you far. RFID cloning. So there's a handful of ways you can do this. There's some really cool tools out there. We use our own tool we call the Huntsman. It's based off of Bishop Fox's Tastic. We've upgraded a little bit so we have some cool new features. But this is my favorite. This is a long-range HID reader that we get about 24 inches. I have heard of about people getting a little bit more than that, but 24 inches is huge. If you're using the Proxmark, you're familiar with it not getting a huge range. You're looking at the ass grab technique. You're pretty much touching them in order to get a good read, but with something really cool like this, I can just put it in my purse and walk by and grab credentials. And then also we have Bluetooth enabled on it. So when I am walking around, if I have my phone up in a Bluetooth terminal, I am able to see if I'm capturing credentials. So some couple tips with RFID cloning. When you are doing recon or during one of your first visits and you're trying to capture badge credentials, get as many as you can. I've gotten one before and was super excited, went back to my hotel room, cloned it. This employee didn't have as much access as other employees, so I had to go back and start recloning again. So get as many as you can to make as many duplicates as you can. And also, if you are reading, don't keep cards on you or you'll walk around and wondering why you're picking up credentials when nobody's around and you'll get really confused. Alright, USB drops. A handful of companies, if you go online and when you read about how they do physical security assessments, they will say that they pretty much put them in parking lots. And I apologize, this slide deck's supposed to remove any guesses, but the answer is you do not put them in parking lots. The reason why is because anyone can find them. If it's a shared building, you know, other companies could get them. If you have clients or patients that are in that parking lot, they can pick them up. Employees can take them home. I'm just kind of assuming other people like that are not in scope. So that's one thing. I do not like to put them in parking lots. I like to put them on employees' desks. One of my favorite things, I heard Jason Street say that he does, and it's worked really well for me, is I take a bunch of white envelopes, and if I walk by an office, I see the name on the door. I write down their name, stick the USB in the envelope, and put it on their desk. You're more likely to want to open something like that when it's more personable. And I name them fun things like payroll or bonuses or even employee termination, something that's really going to make you want to open that file. When I do have someone open the file on the USB, they get this error message. It says, error, this file cannot be opened on this computer. I do this for a handful of reasons. One is I want to see how many times they try to open it, and two, I want to see if they open on other computers. So more than likely, I will see the same file being opened on one computer like 2 or 3 times, and then like 2 minutes later you'll see it being opened on another computer. So it's really getting you more hits. And we have something really cool with ours is I get instant text message the second it's open. So I'm able to see which USB, because I identify each specific USB so I can kind of track where I left them, and a handful of information. So this just calls back in, checks into my server, says, hey, I'm open, and spits me out a really cool text message. Network port security. Again, this is not something I focus on. It is a valid attack vector, but I'm not going to do this and say, oh, I did a physical, I win, right? It is something I believe you should do, though. So when I do try to connect to the internal network, I look for network ports in places like conference rooms or lobbies, even the data center, pretty much, yeah, anywhere I can see a jack. And I just run a simple ping scan just to say, hey, I'm on, you know, I was able to get access. Non-destructive entry. I can spend a lot of time talking about this, but Deviant has recently done a SANS webcast, and I strongly suggest you watch that. He goes over all of the cool tools he uses, and again, it's an awesome video. But these are just a handful of things that I typically keep on me. I have a huge purse, and I put in my badge reader, I put in all these tools, I put in my clipboard, things like that. If someone does physicals and they just say they pick locks the whole time, they're either lying or not that smart. Picking locks, it's a kind of a high risk. It's loud. If someone walks by, it's really hard to talk your way out of that one. I don't like to do it. The only times I really like to do it is if it's a low risk and high reward. So when I was at a hospital recently, one of their conference room doors was locked, but they had a paper on the outside that said, prepping for financial audit, please do not use this room. When you look in through the glass, you see paperwork all over the desk. I knew I wanted to get my hands all over that paperwork. So nobody was around. It was a floor that was empty. It was after hours. So the risk was a lot lower. So I did pick the lock in that situation, but it's not something I go and I do every time. Theft. This is by far my favorite thing to do on physical security assessments. It is the most tangible thing you can do, and nothing feels good than grabbing a laptop. But if you do have theft in scope, do not leave your client site with the stuff. Make sure you have a designated person to call or an office to leave the stuff. The last thing you want is to leave the building with a bunch of like patient records or medical records and walk outside and it's crazy wind and they go flying everywhere. Or you leave it in your car or hotel and it gets broken into. That's the last thing you want on to have to deal with. But I look for things like laptops, company phones, again, making sure these are company, not employee, files, building keys, or even badges. After hours access, so there are pros and cons to this. The pros would be, not a lot of staff around, or if they are staff, they're different staff, so you're kind of testing a different group of people. More features to test, right? And then the cons would be if there are cameras being monitored and it's really dead, you're going to stand out more, like looking around stuff. So just, I like to limit my time after hours if that's the case. And again, you don't want to accidentally set off an alarm or anything, but this is a valid vector that I believe you should be testing. Alright, so those kind of wrap up my different attack vectors. Those are everything I do, and I have this attack risk chart, which I kind of explained earlier is low, medium, high. When I do my physical security assessments, I typically do 4 to 5 visits. My first visit is recon. My second visit is everything that's low risk. I can talk my way out of, it's not that big of a deal if I get caught because I can continue on. Next my next visit would be medium. So these are things like asking employees questions, or even doing the network ports, excuse me, scanning. And then hi, these are things, if I get caught, they're going to call security or the cops or something like that. So that's really after hours access, non-destructive entry, and theft. The reason why I do it this way is because if I were to go in and start off with theft and I get my cover blown, that doesn't leave me time to test anything else. My cover is blown. So I really try to get in the more attack vectors as I can this way. And a couple tips and tricks. I'm sorry if I'm talking fast. I know time's kind of running out. Bathrooms are your friend. As Ryan says here, he's done some Wi-Fi cracking from a bathroom stall. In his defense, he said it was a shared building and he couldn't reach from his car, but still, I absolutely love bathrooms. I will sneak in right before the building closes, hang out till a lot of people leave and the front doors are locked, and then I'm in the building. I have access. So get out of jail free card, this is something I kind of bitch about a lot. Really, this should stay a monopoly. If you're banking on this to not have the cops called on you, you've probably not been apprehended before. If someone's going to call the cops on you, they're going to call the cops on you. A paper's not going to stop that. I like just to keep a signed copy of the SAL and the phone number for my point of contact, just in case it does get to the point where they need to call. But again, when I have had the cops call on me in the past, I didn't even have a chance to explain myself, so that's just something I think about the situation. And then out of order. So this is something fun we did on 2 different occasions that worked amazingly. We put a piece of paper on a shred bin that said, out of order, please don't use. Then we put a empty bin right next to it. So we went back that night during our after hours and grabbed a handful of different documents that people wanted to shred that had all kinds of juicy stuff on there. Spilled coffee. So if I do know other places in the building or next door to the building, I like to actually spill coffee for real on my resume, let it dry just a little bit. When I run into the reception at my target company, I have this in my hand so it's visual. She knows that I really did spill coffee on it. And I say, can you please print off my resume? I'm in a jam. I have to get over there soon. Just act total flustered, and people want to help. They really do. So a lot of times they will comply to that request. All right, training. I believe training for physical security assessments can be done one of 2 ways, or even both. Teachable moments. So when I say teachable moments, I mean I'm going back either the day after my assessment or later that same day, and I'm going up to the people who maybe let me into secure areas or who I piggybacked and they didn't say anything. And I try to find these people and I explain to them, hey, I could have been a bad guy. You just gave me access to whatever. You just let me in without questioning me. And seeing their reaction to that, you can just tell in their eyes, like, they do not want to do that again. So teachable moments is huge. And then security awareness training. My company is really against computer-based training. We like to do all of our stuff on site. It's really away from distractions. We could show real examples from assessments we perform. So these are 2 ways I believe training should be conducted. All right, just a quick recap. I talked about OSINT. I talked about looking at employees, the physical location, and vendors. Pretext development, making sure you know who you want to be and then dress that part. Recon, the 3 different areas that I like to go out and search before actually showing up on site to do the attack vectors. And then the handful of attack vectors, again, not just tailgating in and plugging something into their network and bouncing, really testing their people and their different security controls. And then 2 different training options as well. Again, here's my contact information. If you would like a copy of the slide deck, please feel free to email me. And I really am so happy that you guys were able to listen in. All right, Carol, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, well, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for Stephanie, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is, what are the most important things to bring on site in order to support a pretext?
In order to support a pretext, I would say the handful of things I would bring is a badge and business cards, and then a clipboard. There's something powerful about having a clipboard that people just automatically assume you know what you're doing. So those would be the three things that I would suggest.
All right, thanks. How often do people get suspicious if you are trying to get information from them?
I would say probably about 1 in 15. The problem is, even if you see that they're suspicious, they don't report it, and that could be because they don't even know who to report it to. People get less suspicious though when I ask them to plug in a USB and print something off for me. They assume there's nothing malicious there. But if I ask questions and things like that, I'd say they get a little bit more suspicious.
All right, thank you. What's your favorite tool to bring to a physical assessment?
My favorite tool, I would probably say honestly a clipboard. Again, that's really powerful. A lot of people assume if you have a clipboard and some documents, especially with their logo on them and the logo of who you're impersonating, that really goes a long way.
Do you have any book recommendations for elicitation?
One of my favorite books, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, one of my favorite books that I'd recommend starting with, it's How to Build Quick Rapport. And it's called It's Not All About Me by Robin Dreeke. And it is a great book and a fast read and will give you tons of information about really how to start with rapport.
Thanks. Do you get scared before starting the test?
I always get scared. I mean, there's so much involved. You never know if someone's going to be calling the cops or getting suspicious. The times that I'm not as scared is when I have been able to do more OSINT and find more things and really feel a lot more confident.
And someone wonders, how many times have you had the cops called on you?
So far, only once. So knock on wood, but just the one time.
How have you gently trained folks who've fallen for your social engineering strategies so that they don't feel experimented on? Have you had any bad experiences with this or any great experiences with this?
So I'm going to assume you mean the teachable moments, like going back to them after they maybe gave me some type of information. So the experience has been mixed. You can tell they feel victimized, and honestly, you know, they really should. They have been, right? But seeing that in their eyes and experiencing that, they're not going to want to do it again. But being as polite as I can and try not to come off as rude. They a lot of times will get defensive, but really I think having that victimization of feeling, they're not going to want to do that again.
All right, thanks. If your cover is blown or semi-blown and you want to continue testing, how do you resume?
It really depends on the client. So for the one where my cover was blown, I think at 6 out of 16 sites, the client really wanted me to continue with the same pretext, which even though I disagreed with, it still was able to test a handful of things. It was able to test if the sites were talking to each other. I believe someone at the company had sent out a company-wide email explaining that someone was coming on site with this pretext, don't let them in. Even though they had that, I was still able to text, are they verifying me? Are they reporting me? I did have one place actually out of the remaining that still let me in. So this place, you know, obviously doesn't check their email or just really didn't care, but really I go back to the client to make sure I can switch my pretext if my cover is blown, but if I can't, it still is testing verification.
All right. Do you ever do physical security tests with a team? Do you think having multiple people is an advantage on a job? And then someone kind of wonders also, are people more suspicious of males than females?
Yeah, so to answer the team question, I do most of mine solo. Every once in a while, I do have JC that will do them with me, or if we're doing more of a red team, we will have a bigger team. Mixed feelings on that. If I'm doing more of like an interview like the HIPAA audit, it makes sense for me to be alone. I think if there was a bunch of us and you're interviewing someone, it would make them feel kind of probably more scared. So in that sense, I wouldn't do it. Again, depends on the pretext. And then the second question was female or male. That's a great question. When I pick out my pretext, I try to be really careful and I play into stereotypes. I know that one of the first physical security assessments that I had ever done, I pretended I was a printer repair person. I do not look like a printer repair person. I don't look like someone in IT, and I realized that fast. Like they got more questionable, because I was a female, and that's fine. That's stereotypes. You just have to play to it. You can't make them more concerned. So when I pick out my pretext, I really try to make sure I pick out things that people don't question.
Have you ever had to disguise yourself with wigs or makeup?
Not me personally. I do have a background in special effects makeup, and one of my favorite physical security assessments, I actually got to dress one of my teammates up as an old person. So bald cap, gave them some fake wrinkles, glasses, went to the thrift store and made them look as old as possible, and that was a lot of fun.
All right. USBs seem to be getting well known. Seem to be getting to be a well-known attack vector. What's next? Mobile to mobile or Bluetooth?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure, I'll read it exactly as it's written. USBs seem to be getting well-known attack vector. What's next? Mobile to mobile or Bluetooth?
I don't know if I understand the question, so if you want to email me, I would love to discuss it more.
Okay, that was our last question. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I really appreciate everyone listening in, and again, thank you so much to SANS for facilitating. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.